Thank you for attending the Tax1099.com demo today. My name is Greg and I work with ZenWork. ZenWork powers the Tax 1099 e-filing platform. We are cloud-based. There's no initial cost up front. There's no initial software to buy. You can just go to tax1099.com and create a free account. In fact, there's quite a few things that you can do on the platform before you're prompted to make any sort of payment. So I encourage you to take it for a test run. After the demo, you can actually import some sample vendor data and even create some forms. Everything can be deleted out right up until the point when you're ready to submit and submit a payment as well. So after you do create the free login, you'll be taken to the Tax 1099 dashboard homepage. This is where we start the e-filing process. What you're looking at here are some quick links, some of the most popular activities, as well as some quick views on some submissions and previous requests that I have done. Want to also mention that we do have workflow capabilities for larger offices right up here under settings. You can come to member users. After your primary user creates that initial login, he or she can come in and invite sub-users. This way, every action that's taken can be looked at under the same account. Everything will be grouped together. Furthermore, with the workflow capabilities, you can come under group rights and you can specify what each worker can or cannot do. And this is also where you can set up to have one person be a reviewer, whereas when forms are submitted, instead of being submitted to the IRS, they're submitted to your internal reviewer, who can then submit to the IRS in states, or can of course send it back to the person that prepared the forms to change something. But back to the dashboard homepage, I want to tell you a little bit about what we're going to learn today. It's basically a four-step process. The first step is getting the vendor information into Tax 1099, and we certainly have a lot of solutions there that make that pretty easy for you. The second step would be creating the actual forms, and the third step would be submitting to the IRS and states, and the fourth step is getting the copies out to the recipients. Of course, after we submit to the IRS and get the copies out to the recipients, there will be instances when you do want to access the forms, and we're going to show you how you'll be able to access those forms on our cloud-based system for up to 7 years, and really do quite a bit of different things with those forms. So we will get started with the first step, as I mentioned, that is getting your vendor or recipient data into Tax 1099. The two primary ways to do that is manual entry or in bulk, which is under the import option here. But we're going to take a look real fast at the manual entry. If you ever do have to do a one-off type form, you can come under Forms and New Forms and simply just type your information in. I wanted to start here also because this gives you a good view of the different forms that you can e-file and process on the Tax 1099 platform. It's not just the 1099 forms, also the 1095, the ACA forms. We have the payroll forms, the W-2 forms. You'll also notice a couple of previous years listed here, indicating that you can go back if you missed any filings from the 2 previous years. You can do that on the Tax 1099 platform. But back to the manual entry, I'm going to use the 1099 miscellaneous form in this example to show you the manual interface. You can enter payer information in manually here. If you already have payer information, of course, you'll have that in the corresponding drop-down box. And if I choose one, I'll also be able to choose their corresponding recipients. If I do need to add a recipient under the payer, though, I can manually do that here. Once I enter the dollar figures in, then we'll basically be all set to go to the next step. But I did want to also point out that this is the interface where you also want to go to do corrections. And this would be if the IRS rejected one of your earlier forms and you need to submit a corrected, you would come in here and pull up the appropriate payer and recipient, change that information. Just be sure that you check this corrected box, and once we hit the save and continue button there at the bottom, what will happen is it'll be submitted to the IRS, and they'll disregard the previous form with that same tax ID number on it and start using this corrected form. The second way to get your vendor recipient data into Tax 1099 would be in bulk, which most of our larger filers will use this import option. If you look at this menu, you'll also see, besides the Excel spreadsheet, which I'm going to use today, you'll see different accounting softwares. We are integrated with most of the most popular accounting software programs, QuickBooks, Xero, and bill paying software such as Bill.com. I want to show you real fast what that interface looks like. It's a same basic process for most of these, as you're going to see here on the QuickBooks Online version. You would enter in your QuickBooks login information. I'm already connected, so it's not asking me for my login information, but you would simply put that in, select the tax year that you want to work with, and once you hit the proceed button, then it will let you choose the payer that you want to import recipient information for, that's in QuickBooks, and that transferring process is seamless, straight from QuickBooks Online into the Tax 1099 program, and you would proceed normally like we're going to show you after we get our vendor data imported through an Excel spreadsheet. I also want to mention that this is a new feature, is the auto sync with most of the accounting programs that we were looking at earlier. This means that if you make any changes on the Tax 1099 side to your vendor data, if you have this box checked, you will be able to automatically have the system update your original source, which in this case is the QuickBooks Online. So that's a nice new feature. Back to the import, I am going to bring my data in through an Excel spreadsheet, which a lot of our accounts payable customers tend to prefer. Now, if you do have problems importing with your Excel because of format situations, which we do actually handle most formats without any problem, but at the very least you can have us import the vendor data into the system for you, and then we would notify you that it's ready, and you would go in and complete the e-filing process. But on this example, what I'm going to do is import some test data that I have. I have 10 test vendors on my desktop, and we're going to use the 1099 miscellaneous form in this example. I also want to stress how important it is, if you are going to use the Excel import, that you take advantage of our template. You'll see right here that there are templates available, CSV and Excel, for all of the different forms. I have one right here that I wanted to show you some of the different column headings. It's a good way for you to see some of the data, the way the vendor data would need to be dealt with. Now, not all of these are mandatory forms, but it does include every single field that is on the actual tax form. So as you can see, we've got the payer columns here next to that, the different recipient columns, and then next to that we have all the different options as far as where you want to put the dollar figures, where you want to designate them as a rent or maybe as a royalty, for example. So please try to copy and paste and use this import template if you are planning on importing your information via Excel. And as I mentioned before, at the very least, it's a free service to have us import the information for you, and you would just go in and complete the process after that. So I will select my sample vendors that I have right here, and we will start the first step. As I mentioned, that first step is getting the vendor data into Tax 1099, and then we're also part of that first step would be verifying the vendor data. At this stage, what we want to do is verify that we have all of the vendor data necessary to actually create the 1099 forms. The Tax 1099 platform makes this very easy with green dots and red dots. As you can see here, one of our vendors is missing a mandatory field of data displayed here with the red dot. However, it's really simple to go into the vendor information and add or make changes. As you can see here with this particular vendor, I just need to add in the state and update his records, and the red dot changes to green. So it looks like all 10 of our sample vendors have all of the data necessary for Tax 1099 to actually create the forms. Before we create the forms, I did want to mention that even up to this point, you can still make edits to the form. So if you catch a mistake, if a dollar figure is off, or if one of the designated boxes needs to be changed, you can do that up to this point before we create the forms by clicking on the corresponding edit button. But with our sample data, everything looks good. The dollar figures look good. The boxes look good. One little trick that some of our users do is just to double check their totals at the bottom of the page and make sure that that total amount is matching up with what they thought it would be. But we'll go ahead and select all of our vendors here because we do want to create forms for all of them. So I'll select all, and when I hit the next button here, we will actually be creating the forms, and we'll make a couple of decisions on how we want to proceed with the recipient forms before we actually submit these to the IRS and to the states. Okay, we have created our 1099 forms for our sample recipients, and we're at the stage now right before we submit to the IRS and to the states. So we need to make some decisions right now on how we want to handle the recipient copies, how we want to do the state filings, and when we want the IRS to actually process this. On our system, you can set the processing date out into the future. You'll see the date boxes right here under the scheduled date column. That's what this is for. So you can set this date up until the last possible date that the IRS will accept the e-filed forms. Last year, for example, for the 1099 miscellaneous, that was January 31st. So during tax season, by default, this date will list January 31st, and most people leave it at that date, and then when they're processing or going through the steps with the software, let's say it's in the middle of January, that'll give them a chance to get those recipient copies out and have a couple of weeks there where if there are any errors on those recipient copies, the recipients can contact the payer, and those forms that are sent to the IRS, those will be in a pending status until the 31st of January. So it's very simple to come in to our system and do a simple edit instead of having to do the full-scale correction which you would have done if you had submitted to the IRS and had the IRS process it that same day. So our system does let you set that processing date out into the future, which is really helpful in avoiding any corrections or penalties. A couple of things that I wanted to mention here about the recipient delivery options. You do have the option to have Tax 1099 mail these forms for you. That's this column here. There's a separate charge, of course, for the mailing service. However, we do have a couple of advantages for you. One is that it saves you a lot of time. Our turnaround time is within 48 business hours, a lot faster than that if we're right on that deadline in the last part of January or March. We also put a barcode on all of our pieces, and as they go through the USPS distribution system and they are scanned by an employee of the Postal Service, that will show up in our reports under the form delivery report. You'll be able to tell any recipient that calls you wondering where their form is, exactly where that form is, instead of having to tell them that it's in the hands of the post office. If you do choose the email option, we do send those out password protected. As soon as we go through the checkout process, those are automatically emailed out to the recipients. None of my sample vendors or recipients have email addresses listed, so it's grayed out. It's not letting me choose that option. But let's say that out of the 10 recipients listed here, that 5 of them have email addresses. Pretty easy to come down here and just check those 5 off. But if you have 500, a little harder to do, so it kind of makes it easy in the fact that you can check the top box at the top of this column and it will auto check just the ones that have email addresses, so you can send it out that way, and the other ones of course can be sent out by USPS mail. On the email, they are password protected, so the recipient will need to enter their first 4 letters of their business name and the last 4 digits of their tax ID number. Once they do that, they'll be able to access that document in a PDF format. We also provide you with a read receipt report. Again, that's under reports and form delivery reports. The read receipt report tells you when and if that email has been opened. Of course, this is very important with tax documents. I always suggest to our users that they monitor that report for 3 or 4 days, and if that email is not opened, they really need to send out a hard copy, because that email address might be old or might be in error. I want to move over to the state filing column. Lots of people have lots of questions on state filings. We do file to all 50 states, but of course the states have different requirements. That's something that our team keeps up with on a daily basis. So no matter what format or deadline that different states have, we are aware of all of that and adhere to all of those requirements. It breaks down this way. States are either in the combined federal and state filing program or they're not. The ones that are, it's automatically sent out to those states when you send to the IRS. You'll see that all of these boxes are also grayed out. That's because my recipients are all from states that are part of the combined federal and state filing program. There's no action to be taken because it's automatically sent out by default, so they are grayed out. However, there's a second group of states that are not in this combined federal and state filing program. A very small number. There's only about 5 or 6 states that are not in that program, but you do have to manually take an action to have us send out a copy to those states. Again, we try to make it as easy as possible for you, and you can just auto check this top box and it would go down here and find any recipients um, that were from states that are not part of the combined federal and state filing program, but do require the forms to be submitted. Well, an example of this is Pennsylvania. So, for example, if our first vendor here, Ann Gable, was from Pennsylvania, the state name would be listed right here. It would allow me to check this box. When I check it, what that's saying is that I do want Tax 1099 to send this to the state of Pennsylvania. So you won't find that too often. The vast majority are part of the combined federal and state filing program. There's a few states that actually do not require the 1099 forms, so that just leaves that small handful of states that you do have to take a manual action. But again, just check the top box. It'll auto check all the states that are not part of that program. So those are the three main decisions that we have to make here before we go to the checkout page and before we submit to the IRS and to the states. I did want to mention a couple of other quick things. The 10 match that you see here, a couple of different times when you can do 10 matches. The 10 match, of course, is the tax ID number. We're matching it up against the IRS database to make sure that the information that the vendor gave you is the same information that the IRS has in their records. If it does not match, the IRS fines, potentially fines users up to $260 for each of those offenses. But the 10 match, really easy process. It's a single click, and you can match that up against the IRS database. The time frame for that turnaround depends on the IRS level of service, how busy they are on any particular day, but the turnaround time can be anywhere from a few hours to 12 hours to get that answer back. And you will be notified by email, and it will also show up in the reports here. The other good time to do a 10 match is at the front end when you onboard the actual vendor, when you send out the W-9. I'm going to show you our vendor management and onboarding tools, which are under the people menu right up here, and we'll go over that after we finish the actual part where we're dealing with the forms. Lastly, on this page, we have not submitted yet, so we can still do some edits. If there's something that doesn't look right as far as a dollar amount or vendor information, we can still edit up to this point if we need to. But the next step will be going through the tax 1099 checkout process and also e-filing to the IRS and to the states. A couple of things that I do want to mention on the checkout page. There is an option to put down a prepaid amount. A couple of advantages to doing this. You will not have to put in your credit card information every time you're prompted. Whenever you request a 10 match or a W-9, for example, or submit a form, you would have to put in your credit card information before you complete that transaction. If you use the prepaid option, of course, it will just deduct from that balance. That's the situation on the screen right now, is that there is a prepaid balance on my account. That's the reason that we're not seeing the credit card box here where you would input your information. If I did not have a prepaid amount, of course, I could put that credit card information in right here. Once we hit pay and submit, once we click here, it's going to, the forms are going to be sent to the states and to the IRS and to the recipients. It happens pretty much automatically. Okay, we have finished submitting our tax forms to the IRS and to the states, but as many of you know, we do need to be able to easily access the forms afterwards in case we need to make any changes or send out copies to vendors that contact us. In Tax 1099, we do all of this under Manage Forms. Again, we are under Forms and right down here under Manage Forms. Really easy to pull up any of your payers and of course the corresponding recipients. You'll have a drop-down box right here. A great feature is that we do store these for the forms for up to 7 years for you. So even though you'll probably have them backed up on your hard drive or in a independent drive, you can still easily access the vendor forms right here on the platform for up to 7 years. A couple of other things that we can do in the Manage Forms area: if we do submit to the IRS in a pending status, as we had mentioned is possible, we can come in here if a recipient notifies us that there's a mistake on their form, and we can simply edit that form. We can do this up until the very last day that the IRS accepts the electronically filed forms. As I had also mentioned before, last year for the popular 1099 miscellaneous form, that date was January 31st. So after January 31st, the edit form option is grayed out and it will not let you edit the form. But that's one of the advantages of using the Tax 1099 system, is that you can put the actual IRS processing date, push that out into the future so that you can do a simple edit instead of a full-scale correction. Another example of a task that you might want to do in Manage Forms: in the previous page we had talked about some of the options for the recipient deliveries. Well, of course, we can, if we want, just simply print these out and mail them ourselves on plain white paper. There's no reason to go to the Office Depot, Office Max store to buy your tax forms, because these print out on plain white paper, and there's not an A, B, or C copy. You just use the same copy for the recipient and for the payer and also for the IRS. But you can view and print right here. I'm just going to show you this, the box that pops up, so you can also print out the payer copy as well. Now, you can block submissions, again, if they are in a pending status. That's no problem. However, you will not be able to block a single form. You will be blocking the entire submission. So a lot of times people will submit to the IRS in batches. So it will block the entire batch. Each batch will have a different IRS reference number, and that's what you'll be blocking. Is you'll be blocking a single batch with a single reference number. You cannot block a single form within that batch, however. But if it's an emergency, that is available to you up until the date that you had set in our system for the IRS to actually process your forms that you had earlier submitted in a pending status. Okay, other than accessing the forms, there's a few things that we did want to touch on at the end of the demo here. One of them is our vendor management tool. We have been working under the forms category prior to this, but now we'll be moving under the people menu. As you see, there's a way to manage your recipients and also manage payers. So a lot of our users, they will actually keep their vendors or recipient data in Tax 1099 year-round. That way, when the tax season comes around, it's really easy to attach a 1099 form or other type of form to each of the recipients and submit to the IRS and get their copy out to them. So we're going to take a look at that right now. We are now under Payers and Manage Recipients. As mentioned before, Tax 1099 does give you a vendor or recipient management page that you can use alongside the e-file tool. We do have users that keep their vendor information in Tax 1099 as their original vendor source. They find it easier during tax season instead of having to deal with the importing process, just to keep it all right in here. Now, a couple of things, a couple of features that you can take advantage of with our Manage Recipient tool. We do offer W-9 request. Now this would be done electronically through the email system. So all you really need from a new vendor or even a current vendor would be their email address. You can send off the W-9. They'll complete that online on their side. When they send that back to you, it will auto update or auto complete your records or their record within Tax 1099, and you will not have to do any manual entry on that. Then you can turn around and request a 10 match to make sure that the new information that this vendor just sent you actually matches with the information that they had sent to the IRS earlier. As I had mentioned on a previous page that gave you the 10 match option, the IRS does take this vendor information seriously, and the fines go up every year. Last year, I believe they were around $260. There is a process that you can go through if you are fined by the IRS to negate that fine. And the process does include or can include proof that you did request a 10 match, that you did take proactive action to make sure that that vendor information is correct. So if you can prove to the IRS that you did take action, such as requesting a 10 match on the vendor, then they'll usually waive that fine. Other options as far as the vendor management tool is that if you do happen to also have your vendors in an accounting program such as QuickBooks or Xero, you can sync back to those systems any updates that you make within Tax 1099 on your vendor information. So there's a lot of different options as far as how to handle your vendor information, but I did want to let everybody know that you do have the option to just keep your recipients or vendor information right in Tax 1099 all year round instead of just bringing the information in at tax season. And lastly, I did want to point out that we do have a template if you do want to bring your recipient or vendor information in by bulk. You can do that by using our template. It simply has all the recipient column headings that you can fill in. It does not have the dollar figures because form information, any information pertaining to a 1099 form is not included in this update. It's just the vendor information. Lastly, we're going to take a final look at a few things that are important to people, such as pricing. Give you a little information on the reports and a little more information on our customer support right now. On the customer support side, we do have some of the best support in the industry, simply because we do offer telephone support, which it seems like more and more companies are getting away from. But as you can see, we have a toll-free number. We have extra staff during the tax season and extra hours. I believe it's 8 to 8 daily Central Time during the tax season. A couple of other ways that you can contact us, of course, is through email, and then we also have the chat support right here in the bottom right-hand side. And most of our customer support personnel have been helping people with their 1099 forms for many years, so it's a good resource. Definitely check them out if you run into any problems with your 1099s or with the software. Want to also mention the pricing. I'm going to go back. I have a tab open here with our home page. The pricing is always available right here off of the home page. I'm going to click on this real fast and just give you a little heads up how this works. The basic plan, there's no extra charges. It's just a per form price, and that's the essential plan. Have a couple of other plans that carry an annual fee along with the per form pricing, but with the annual fee you do get some extra advantages, such as free tin matching and the workflow capabilities that I had mentioned if you work in a larger office. But yeah, you can come right here off of the home page at any time and see what the pricing is on the 1099s series and W2s. 1095 forms, those are all priced out at the same, but you'll see some of the payroll forms or some of the 900 series forms. They are priced also in a tiered fashion, but at a different pricing point. One last thing is that we do include a pricing calculator. So if you were to, for example, want to put down a prepaid amount into Tax 1099, as we described before, you can easily figure out what amount that's going to be. One item that I forgot to mention earlier on the prepaid amount is that if you do have a remaining balance left over on your account after tax season, we can get that refund out to you within 48 business hours. If you are a large filer, I do want to encourage you to contact us about our new outsourcing service called eFile Assist. This is a service that we started after speaking with so many larger filers who honestly just wanted to have somebody handle the entire process for them. And since we have the experience doing it, we tell people, just give us your vendor file and we'll do the rest for you. It's worked out well, and we can definitely give you some pricing and information on that if you file a large amount of forms. That covers everything for the demo today. I do have some contact information up on the screen right now, and encourage you to create that free account on Tax 1099 and even maybe enter some vendor information and create some forms. Remember, you can delete everything out right up until the time when you submit to the IRS and are prompted to make a payment. Thank you very much. Again, my name's Greg, and hope to hear from you soon.